Okay. So the question is, what is cryptocurrency? Cryptocurrency can be digital money. It can also be digital representation of any form of an asset. Cryptocurrency uses encryption and a technology called blockchain. Cryptocurrency is built on blockchain, and blockchain is simply, to put simply, is a decentralized ledger distributed across thousands or millions of computers around the world. Cryptocurrency is essentially smart programmable money that improves security, settlements, and transaction speeds without the need of a bank or a middleman. Now, this video that I've got here, this first video, is actually describing how blockchain actually works. So this is just a couple minutes long. I'm going to share this with you guys. Hopefully this will play and share the sound as well. If you don't hear anything on the video, please let me know, either in the chat box or by saying something.
What is blockchain technology and how does it work? Put simply, cryptocurrency is built on blockchain technology. It's like the infrastructure crypto runs on. For simplicity, I'll use Bitcoin as an example. Each Bitcoin wallet has both a public key and a private key. These keys are very similar to an address. The public address is used for receiving Bitcoin, and the private key gives you access to your funds, similar to the act of withdrawals to an account. The Bitcoin network is made up of thousands of computers all around the world running the same Bitcoin program or ledger at the same time. Imagine each computer being like an old-fashioned ledger book recording transactions. Each page of transactions could be considered a block. Put those blocks together and you have a blockchain. Essentially, what happens when a transaction is broadcasted to the network, it's placed into a pool of unconfirmed transactions. Then, computers from all around the world will gather some of these transactions and place them in their own blocks. A new block is added to the blockchain when a computer on the network wins the right to add its block to the chain by becoming the first one to successfully solve a very complex mathematical equation. This process happens every 10 minutes. When the winning computer does this, it gets rewarded with newly minted Bitcoin. This process is called mining for Bitcoin and requires a lot of computer hardware and energy to do so. The other computers who did not solve the equation first must put their blocks of transactions back into the pool of unconfirmed transactions and update their ledger with the winning block. This process happens every 10 minutes, and the entire network of computers are validating each other and coming to consensus. The Bitcoin network is the most secure computer network in the world due to its combined computing power. The only way that a blockchain can be compromised is if somebody has 51% of the combined computing power of the entire network. In 2014 alone, the Bitcoin network had more computing power than the top 500 supercomputers combined, and it's only continued to grow since then. This, my friends, is how blockchain technology works, and it's going to change everything.
And as you know, I like to make videos in my car, so please don't judge me. But I also have a website, and so if you see stuff as I go through this presentation, cryptomore.com. I have a YouTube channel under that name, and I create weekly, if not several videos a week about this technology and about Bitcoin. So if you want to do any further learning down the road, I would highly recommend you go check out my website and watch these videos. But the real question is, why is Bitcoin money? Why can it be considered a form of money? And Bitcoin essentially shares the same properties of gold, but is more superior in its portability, divisibility, and limited nature. Bitcoin's monetary policy is known in advance and is predictable. It has a limited supply built into the code. Only 21 million will ever exist, and it's divisible by 8 decimal points. So each coin is divisible by 8 decimal points. It's an apolitical money tied to no nation, person, or company. It's a decentralized free market technology controlled by nobody. It's the world's largest, most secure, decentralized ledger built for a digital age, and Bitcoin is both a money and a payment network. And I think the important thing that we need to realize when we talk about the evolution of a new asset class or something like Bitcoin that is becoming money is money has an evolution. It goes through stages where first it's a collectible, then it becomes a store of value, then it becomes a medium of exchange, and then finally it becomes a measure of value. And essentially, Bitcoin has entered this store of value type mentality in the minds of people. And yes, it does have the properties of money, which I'll list and talk about here in a minute through a video. But it's really fascinating because this is the first time in our lifetime, and probably in multiple generations, where we've had a new asset class similar or like Bitcoin coming to the world stage. And governments and central banks are all trying to get into this game and are all trying to implement technology like this because they realize that this technology is so disruptive that central banks, if they don't hop on this bandwagon, then essentially this technology will go around them. And essentially we'll have two ecosystems rise up at the same time, one that's decentralized and one that is centralized by a government or central bank. So there will be competition in money. There will be separation of state and money. And I think in the long run, this is going to produce great things, great results. But I wanted to go ahead and move forward with this next video to kind of give you an example of a little bit more in-depth explanation of why this is happening.
A lot of times we don't know the difference. Many people don't know the difference between what is money and what is actually currency and what makes them different, because in that scenario, in those explanations and in that understanding, it tells us a lot about our world. It tells us a lot about our freedom and the foundations that this world is built on. In fact, money is such an important topic. Apart from salvation, it's one of the most important topics in my mind that we could learn about, that we could understand, because money represents our freedom, it represents our time, it represents our wealth and our energy. And these things, the only thing that's truly scarce in this world is our time and our energy. And if the system in which we are using is enslaving us, is the chains to our freedom, to our energy, to our time, then it is a injustice. It is wrong, because the system we use is not what our founding fathers set us up to use in the beginning, due to what they learned through this process. But when I hold these up and I say, what's the difference between money and a currency? Well, currency is like the flow of energy. It's like the flow of our output, of our ability. And a lot of times we make the mistake for using it as a store of value. And the only difference that makes between a money and a currency really comes down to these core traits, which is both of them are a medium of exchange, both are a unit of account, both are portable, durable, and they're also divisible and fungible. In other words, they can be interchangeable. The only difference between a currency and a money is store of value. See, things like silver and gold and Bitcoin, to be specific, they are limited in supply. There's only so much of it that can actually be made, that can actually be mined, that's in existence. It's hard money. It's a hard asset. These things, currency, pieces of paper, they're emitted and borrowed. Our government borrows this from a central bank, which has shareholders, which they earn 6% off of loaning money to the American government, which this money is then printed into existence or created into existence out of thin air. So essentially what happens is, if you borrow the first dollar into existence and you owe interest on that dollar from that central bank, where are you going to get the second dollar to pay for that interest? Well, you have to continue to borrow again. So it's a perpetual system of debt that requires more and more spending. And that's why this talk of balanced budgets and paying down our debt, with the system that we have, it is not a likely scenario or a plausible scenario, because what happens is there's always more debt than there is currency in the system. So if you make any substantial effort to pay down the debt, that whole system collapse in a deflationary collapse. So the only option they have is to continually spend and to continually borrow and go deeper into debt and hyperinflate the money to where the money continues to lose value, or I should say the currency loses value. Again, this piece of paper, the US dollar, or the AKA Federal Reserve note, because this is really constitutionally not what a dollar is supposed to be, it has lost 98% of its purchasing power. Back in the 60s and 50s, when people were actually paid with real money, real silver quarters, they were paid $1.25 an hour. I know that sounds crazy, but guess what? If you take this silver today and you take that melt value, though that $1.25 that they earned in silver, and you melt that down, the melt value of that is greater than $17 now. So it's very evident that wages are not keeping up with prices, with inflation, because as the money supply continues to increase, the marketplace realizes that there's more money in the system, so prices have to rise. And so if you're holding this stuff in the bank and all your assets are in dollars, well then your wealth is going to be eaten alive. There's a reason why $20 worth of groceries in 1998 could have bought you a full cart of groceries, versus where today we go to the store and we need at least $100 to have a full cart of groceries. This is just one example of rising prices and inflation, and the simple fact that wages are not keeping up with this. We are being robbed. And here's insult to injury. Is that we pay taxes, okay? We spend more of our time, more of our energy, and we pay these taxes to the government. Well, the government who borrowed this money from a central bank, okay, that created it out of nothing, who earns 6% off of this money each year, what happens is we pay our taxes and we have to pay back that bank. The government has to pay back the central bank in the interest that's owed. Okay, so that is even more of a Ponzi scheme. It's even more of a fraud. And so I would say, how are you storing your money? How are you making sure that you're going to be set for the future? Because historically, all fiat paper currencies have never lasted the test of time. They always go to zero. And we went through it already once in America. When we had the Continental Dollar during the American Revolutionary War, we printed that and hyperinflated that to oblivion because we wanted to pay for the war against the British. But nobody wanted to take those dollars anymore. That's why we came up with the phrase, it's not worth a Continental Dollar. So the Founding Fathers knew that this was important, to be able to have a form of money that holds and sustains its value. And that's why in the Constitution they wrote that only gold and silver could be considered as money. So the dollar was actually a measurement of actual silver and gold. And now, today, we have abandoned that. In the 70s, in the 1970s, when Nixon fully took us off the gold standard and by definition became a true fiat currency, essentially what happened is the dollar became an instrument, a complete instrument of debt. And now we are on a timeline. You know, every fiat currency usually does not exist past 50 years of existence. I mean, there are a couple of scenarios where they've gone longer, but at the end of the day, they all fail. So what makes us think that the US or the Federal Reserve note that's printed from the central bank or created from the central bank, what makes us think it's going to be any different? Okay? What makes us think that this $20 is going to have the same buying power 20 years from now as it does today? Because history is a guide, guys. The money keeps losing value. We're getting to the end of the timetable. Okay, not only that, but the dollar has been the world reserve currency. Countries have been required to hold dollars, to buy oil, to use it in international trade. We have tried to create a demand for dollars, and that's been our number one export. But as soon as this gig is up, all these dollars are going to come home to roost, and we're going to have hyperinflation that's just going to go out of control. The next financial crisis that we're going to have, whether it's a recession or depression, the only answer that they have is to lower interest rates, either to negative interest rates, which is another story, which is ridiculous. Parts of the world are doing it, or they're gonna print more money, quantitative easing. What are you putting your faith in? Are you putting your faith in a piece of paper, or something that actually has intrinsic value, or is limited in supply? Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, whole nother topic. I'm just talking about a general idea here. But I'm talking about all this because I'm passionate about it. I think it's an injustice that the American people are being robbed of their wealth, not just through the taxation to pay back a central bank that's creating money out of thin air, and earning a profit off of it, but also the simple fact that people, they're not keeping up with inflation. I mean, if you keep your money in the bank, you'd be lucky to get 2% interest on that money in the bank. And the Federal Reserve has come out and said that every single year their goal is 2% inflation. That means that they're going to take away 2% of the value of the money that you're actually holding every single year. It just doesn't make sense, guys. You need to do your homework. You need to learn the difference, because your freedom, your wealth, your time, and your energy depends on it. I don't want to see you robbed. I don't want to see you in a challenging situation in the future, because we are going to have hard economic times. We have a lot of things converging in today's society when it comes to monetary history, and things don't look pretty. But if you position yourself in the right way, you can position yourself for the greatest wealth transfer the world has ever seen. This giant bubble of liquidity that's been created worldwide. When people lose confidence in it, and when this thing bursts, all this liquidity is going to go racing to limit it to hard assets limited into supply, so they can try to preserve their purchasing power. Gold and silver has maintained its purchasing power for thousands of years. You can take the same amount of silver, the same amount of gold, and buy almost the equivalent of goods and services as it did back in ancient Egypt. So what money are you using? What money are we using as a country? Is it a good store of value over a long period of time? I can tell you that these do not.
So after that video, you might be thinking, okay, well, if gold and silver and Bitcoin are such great money, why aren't we using it now? And the truth is, there's a principle and an idea out there called Gresham's Law. And the idea behind Gresham's Law is that when you have in circulation both good money and bad money, one being a greater store of value, people will actually hoard the money that will increase and appreciate in value as time goes on, and they will keep the bad money, the lesser money that loses value, into circulation, because you don't want to hang on to that money. And that will continue to happen until everybody continues to lose complete faith and confidence in the Federal Reserve note. And essentially, money is a game of faith and confidence. So much of the stuff that we see coming out of the Federal Reserve, or what we see coming out of the media, or even sometimes what we hear coming out of the White House is much of propaganda, just because most of our security as a nation, as our economic powerhouse, comes from the security and belief in the money system that we have now. But as you can tell, since the coronavirus, which much of these videos I made happened, was before the whole coronavirus pandemic, and I was advising and predicting that we were due for a correction, recession, depression, whatever you want to call it. I just didn't know it was going to come through a black swan event with the coronavirus. And sure enough, my predictions with quantitative easing, lowering interest rates, cash giveaways, they all manifested in this time period. And in fact, with the $6 trillion plus that were created into existence during this time period, typically the inflation of those dollars, or those added dollars, we won't typically see the changes in the prices in the marketplace 18 to 24 months. So I would suspect, here in the near future, we will continue to see prices rise, because the marketplace will continue to adjust and realize that there's more money in circulation. However, it is important to realize, when we talk about Bitcoin being hard money or sound money, it's really hard for people to wrap their mind around it, because all they know is that it's digital money. And digital money, people they work with digital information all the time. So they're used to copying and pasting digital information on their computers or on their phones. And they have a hard time thinking, okay, well, how can Bitcoin be limited in supply if I'm always copying, pasting, and creating digital money? Can it be, created out of willy-nilly, just like the Federal Reserve note? And the answer is no, because of that decentralized ledger system that I shared in the video prior. There is a code in the system that basically dictates how many Bitcoin will come into existence. And by the year 2140, the last Bitcoin will be mined by these computers and on this network. And essentially, the only way, theoretically, that you could ever increase the money supply of Bitcoin is if you got these thousands, if not millions of computers who are securing and running this network and mining for Bitcoin to agree, 94% of them, if you got 94% of them to agree to change the code and implement this code, then theoretically the supply could be changed. However, you're talking about getting thousands, if not millions of people in the future to agree on that and to be on the same page. Now, if you are spending lots of energy, electricity, power, spending money on computer hardware to mine this stuff and to create it into existence, there is a economic and financial incentive for you not to want to change the supply of Bitcoin because it actually would devalue your holdings. So there is a safeguard in there, and it's quite a high standard in order to even change that. But why? But essentially, why is the world embracing things like Bitcoin? Well, first and foremost, you'll hear people trading it. So the first obvious one is people want to make profits. So you'll find a lot of people day trading or trend trading. Number two, it's a non-correlated asset to traditional markets. And Bitcoin has only been around for about 11 years, but for most of its history, it has been not correlated to the stock market, and here recently has been more correlated to the movements of gold and silver. And even billionaires like Tim Draper and Paul Tudor Jones, who's a Wall Street legend, recently came out and said, hey, you know what? I believe Bitcoin's going to be the fastest horse in the race when it comes to preserving your purchasing power, protecting yourself from inflation. You've got people like George Ball, who's also a Wall Street legend, coming out, and who was originally opponent to things like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, is now jumping on the bandwagon. And you've got a lot of institutions like Fidelity, BlackRock. Financial money is coming into this space, so it is fascinating to watch as this comes about. But as I said, number three, it's a hedge against a falling and finite fiat money system. It's decentralized and controlled by nobody. Essentially, it can be unconfiscatable by simply memorizing a seed phrase in your head. It's an open source system that provides trust. Essentially, it's a system of consensus. It's the internet of value. Essentially, it's a peer-to-peer network. Bitcoin's going to do for money what the internet did for information. Essentially, it's 1994, and people are it's the most it's the most. Can you guys hear me? I don't know if you guys, my computer froze up there. All right. It's the most secure computer network in the world. Utility value. It's 10 years. It's been 10 years since its existence, or over 11 now. It's never been hacked. It's the hardest form of money in the world. Essentially, we know the supply of gold, or we have a rough estimate of what's above ground and below ground with gold and silver. Bitcoin, we absolutely know for a fact that only 21 million will ever exist. It's essentially the world's first global money. It's permissionless. I don't need to provide any personal information to utilize the network. Most people are utilizing right now exchanges where they do have to share their personal information, but there are ways to utilize the network without that. And you don't need permission to mine it or to download the software in order to run a full version of the ledger. It has a first mover advantage, basically has a network effect. And number 12, which also I think is very important, it's essentially a apolitical money birthed by the free market. So you might be thinking, okay, well, all these things are great, Matt, but what are central bankers saying? What are governments saying? And so in these next two short videos that I'm going to share, I just want to show you what world leaders are saying about this stuff.
On the digital currency, we have set up a task force, and we will accelerate the effort of this task force. My personal conviction is that given the developments we're seeing, not so much in the Bitcoin segment, But in the stablecoins projects, and we only know of one at the moment, but there are others being explored and underway at the moment, we'd better be ahead of the curve. Even cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Ripple are vying for a spot in the cashless world, constantly reinventing themselves in the hope of offering more stable value and quicker and cheaper settlement.
What kind of threat does this pose to the traditional banking system?
Well, I think you have incumbents, the banks, commercial banks, and you have the disruptors. And clearly the disruptors are having an impact on the incumbents.
Okay, so I have a whole bunch of other stuff to share, but since we only have about 6 minutes left in the whole presentation time, I want to go ahead and scrap the rest of my presentation because essentially what I was just going to do was just going to share with you current trends and developments and just give you a summary of what I essentially just talked about. But let's go ahead and open up for questions because I do want to leave time for that. So I know a lot of you probably have some questions.
Hey, Matt, I'm going to start out with the ones that are in the chat box already.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm getting to the first one. So Don Lawson asked, does this technology lead us to more globalization?
Okay, so if you're talking about a globalization in which is forced or authorized in a centralized manner, it can be. That is, if the system that is being utilized by governments or by people in general, or if we as a population blindly accept this technology from a central bank or a government, or let's say a centralized global authority, then yes, it can very much be that. However, just like any technology, whether it's a gun or whether it's the internet, it can be used for freedom or it can be used for oppression. And as long as people have the personal and individual choice in what money that they use and which cryptocurrency that they use, if it's a decentralized system controlled by nobody, essentially it is a internet system or a internet of value that individuals like myself and you can use and transact with people across the world without permission. The beautiful thing about Bitcoin is nobody can stop the transaction. There's no government that can stop the transaction in its tracks. So if I have a missionary friend who's in Iran, or a missionary friend who's in Russia, or a missionary friend who's in North Korea, and they have access to a cryptocurrency wallet, essentially I can send them value over the internet, and then they can convert that into their local currency wherever they are, and I won't be taxed or penalized or even prevented by sending that value or that money to that person. So like I said, it can be used for both oppression and liberty.
Thank you. Martha Lowe says, my son uses what he calls, for me, so I understand, a virtual bank. Is this the same thing?
Well, it depends on what his definition of a virtual bank is, but essentially there is a motto in the cryptocurrency space called "Be Your Own Bank," and cryptocurrency does do that. It requires personal responsibility because you're essentially taking full custody over these assets and over this digital information. And if you're not very good with passwords or seed phrases and really sensitive information like that, then a lot of people will opt in for a custodian service. But he could be talking about that if that's what he means.
Jim Milburn says, how is fraud controlled? Is there a need for general security?
Okay, so give me a definition of what kind of fraud you're first and foremost scared about.
Jim, would you like to answer that?
Manipulation, Matt.
Manipulation in the money supply or manipulation in people stealing money out of your wallet?
I don't know. You tell me your perspective, because
Okay.
it's hard to toggle from current system to futuristic.
Sure. Okay, so if you are being your own bank and you are your own custodian and you're managing your money and you essentially fall for a scam or fall for a phishing, attempt, and you send money to somebody that you realize, oh wait, I was just scammed, or this was fraudulent. Essentially, there's no way to right now reverse that transaction. However, that's why you have to be intentional and do your homework. Whereas with the centralized system, they can always reverse transactions, cancel transactions, stop transactions. So there is a trade-off when you become sovereign over your own money, and when you're using a system that can't be controlled by the government, you have to essentially realize that there are consequences that ensue when you are taking personal responsibility over your actions. However, when it comes to your wallet being hacked, if you have what they call a hot wallet that's on a computer or on a phone, and you store most of your money in that, and you don't take computer security and internet security seriously, then there are opportunities for hackers to jump into your system, and then whenever you jump onto your computer and you enter that personal information, that can be stolen. However, if you're using what we call a cold storage wallet, which is not connected to the internet, and you only connect it to the internet when you use it, then it is actually really, really secure and safe. So I see a world in which, like I said, this stuff is unconfiscatable. It's the first time that money can be unconfiscatable. If you look in the dictionary, the word unconfiscatable is not actually in there. And that's because we've always had means of stealing stuff from people. But with a Bitcoin wallet, if you memorize what they call a seed phrase, which is basically 12 or 24 words, which basically back up your wallet, if you memorize that, you could throw away all your, records of your cryptocurrency, and then jump on an airplane and then travel to another country, buy another wallet, enter in that seed phrase, and then have access to your funds again. It's really revolutionary. However, I don't always advise people to do that, because if you can't memorize your seed phrase, then you basically lost full access to your money. So then again, it comes down to personal responsibility. However, as we move into this world with this technology, banks will essentially evolve to become custodians of this, because a lot of people are not going to feel secure and safe enough to be custodians over their own money.
So Steve Kerr says, seems like this provides an unlimited source of untraceable funding for terrorist organizations. Are there any safeguards?
So a lot of people think cryptocurrency is primarily used for terrorist activities. However, I would argue that point in saying that the number one tool and asset used for terrorism is actually fiat paper dollars. And criminals prefer paper dollars because they are untraceable in many respects, and there's a lot of liquidity in there. So the amount of malicious or nefarious activity done in cryptocurrency is quite small when you consider it to cash. And banks and governments do want to go to a cashless society, and one of their excuses will be so that we can keep people safe, and that we can trace and track every transaction so we can stop terrorism. However, I am not a big fan of that world, because just going back to that idea of a tool can be used for both good and bad. And if I don't have an option to exercise my liberty or my freedom to transact with whoever I want, whenever I want, or did we lose the meeting? Okay, no, we're still going. So I would much rather prefer an opportunity that we can have private money, and there are cryptocurrencies that are private, but most of them are partially anonymous. So as long as you don't have a personal ID associated to your wallet, you can say somewhat anonymous. However, cryptocurrencies, since it is on a blockchain, the transactions are more traceable than cash if you're using the right tools to untangle that web. And so it's kind of a mixed bag, whereas I think there will be privacy options in the future, but I also don't believe that the answer is going to be completely the use of a centralized system that can literally shut you out in a matter of minutes when you disagree politically, or they do something you don't like.
Matt, we're going to have to call it to a close. We're at 8 o'clock. We've had so many questions on here. We're going to look through, and I'm going to ask Cole to pick out a few that we did not have a chance to get addressed and ask her to send them to you, and then we'll get answers to those from you and send them back out to the group. That's really been interesting. I'm just glad I'm not the one that had to take notes to put it in the fundraiser, because I don't think I could have kept up and done that. So thank you very, very much for your presentation this morning. It's been very interesting.